Alright, here we go. Let's move this.
Energy in that field as well.
Poppy, you being good?
If you run on uranium or thorium,
No, Poppy's not good.
and much lower in energy density than fusion, you don't have to
I'm
go
gonna put the chair away for a minute.
or
For a bit, okay?
If you've got matter to energy conversion, black or dry, something we'll also discuss more later in the series, you can probably achieve a cruising speed of more like half of light speed. You will have a break-even point for any drive.
Alright, so we're just going to pick up
you'll
all the
slow
things
down
here.
more than the fuel you are running into and speed you back up. This break-even point becomes your cruising speed. But the void of space isn't a complete void. There's gas and dust. And it isn't just hydrogen and helium, so you could resupply this way. It's not as cool as a Buse or Ramjet, which was for
like the necklace that Amber gave me? It's awesome. I love it. I've never had anybody give me jewelry before. I love it. You see everything good? Looks good enough. Let's angle it like this a bit.
But if you're collecting them, you'd want to be wide.
Angle this down a bit. Hello, one person watching. How are you?
We usually assume extending a cheap thin sail or collector for those ends, or even just a magnetic field. But it does give you an excuse to make ships that aren't shaped like needles or arrows. And it's not just gas and dust out there. It accumulates into small clumps, and you could possibly send a smaller ship to harvest that, and then catch back up. It still has to pay the energy bill to slow down and speed back up, but it might be able to cheat.
No, Poppy. You're not allowed to knock over the tripod, Poppy. Definitely not allowed.
But leave much behind. Building a big laser powered by materials on that mined-out object to push it back up to speed, so it can catch back up and just decelerate a little, so it doesn't overrun the fleet. This would be very handy on long-term missions, particularly those far from any other place, since they could set those up as communication relays back home. And which follow missions.
How's everyone doing? Not very many people watching live, so leave your comments afterwards if you watch this. Let me know if this is something that's interesting to watch, I guess. I got a bunch of time lapses of doing the dishes that I have to put together. Actually, my computer's working on a time lapse of the sunset right now. That's awesome.
Again, bigger is better though.
Very pleased with how that turned out. Well, we'll see. Still processing. Should be fine though. Looks very good.
And even high speed for a jet relationship. And for such a speed, even a journey of 20,000 light years across a piece of the galaxy could take a million years.
Too much grease on it or something.
There's other reasons bigger is better, and that is that bigger things are generally harder to break. Also, bigger populations tend to innovate a lot more than smaller ones, and tend to be more resilient too. A small crew is unlikely to
on the TV right now is playing Issac Arthur, best science and futurism channel on all of YouTube. Definitely check out his channel. Later I'll put the link to him in the description here. Might have a chance to grab a copy of it right now for the live stream, but let's do that when I have a chance to. But you search Issac Arthur, he's never the first one. He's the only Issac Arthur.
If we've said that we need the lowest population to innovate,
he's the new Isaac.
We also have to expect
definitely is affecting people similarly to Isaac Newton in scope of people reach, and at least in potentially. We'll see how it goes. Like Isaac Newton, like nobody beats the laws of mechanics and calculus. It's not yet, but YouTube has a lot bigger of a reach than you might think. A lot more people watch these videos, and it influences people in their future and their imagination in ways that we have yet to imagine.
And stay on mission and home of a million years. For a civilization to thrive on a relationship, it's going to have to emphasize retaining its knowledge and skills. For to retain its knowledge and skills, it has to value them and show how
1 second.
to the people on board the ship then, not following the future as their eventual destination. But this is true of the here and now too. We focus on skills that are applicable here and now, and when we place a value on knowledge for its own sake, that grows out of coming to love a field as we come to see how useful and enjoyable it is. I mentioned last time that showing how knowledge is applicable to problems was one of the pillars of education for all sponsor, brilliant. And another of those, as we've seen today,
Of course he's
is that
sponsored
it
by
needs to
Brilliant.
be
At
community
least it's
driven.
not better
The
help.
community doesn't establish knowledge and learning.
I'll
But if it does,
be right back here.
inspire people to learn, and they can learn alongside friends and peers. However, some knowledge is less immediately useful, yet nowadays a lot of cronyship fall from its destination. And to make sure folks are learning those, that knowledge needs to be exciting and cultivate curiosity. We try to do that here at SFIA, and so does Brilliant. To truly learn math and science, to be able to master it like the folks on a generation ship will need to, you need a community and environment focused on enhancing our curiosity and showing how exciting and applicable such knowledge can be. If you want to increase your own skills and understanding, you can go to brilliant.org/Issac Arthur and sign up for free. And also, the first 200 people that go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. We've explored a lot about generationships in recent episodes, and have more yet to come in the series. But next time, we'll look at an alternative approach, the idea of placing anyone to be awoken at arrival in sleeper ships. Before we get there, we'll be returning to our new Earth 2.0 series to continue our look at living in the seas with colonizing the oceans and see some of the amazing habitats and cities we might be able to make on the seafloor. We'll also take a look at our book of the month, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. 2 weeks from now, we'll be exploring more on ecosystems and landscapes we've specified on various rotating habitats and discussed here, like our generation ship or other mega structures. For alerts when those episodes come out, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. And if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and share with others. Until next time, thanks for watching and have a great evening.
Okay. Light is here when you're ready. Alright, back at the kitchens here. Let's move this slightly. Alright. There we goes. What do y'all think? Nobody there. put on next. Let's see here. Does climate stuff sound interesting to you? Alright, so this is Michael Mann talking about the IPCC, so we'll see. Annoying music at the beginning.
It's the real news. I'm Garna Noor. A new report from the world's leading body on climate change warns that in just 12 years, rising global temperatures could cause irreversible damage like mass extinctions and severe droughts. Just 12 years. The report from the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, says if temperatures keep increasing at their current rate, global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels between 2030 and 2052. To avoid the disaster, the IPCC says governments must take, quote, rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. Now joining us to talk about this is seminal climate scientist Michael Mann. Michael Mann is a distinguished professor and director of the Earth Science Systems Science Center at Penn State University. He's the author of several books, perhaps most famously in 2012, The Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars, and most recently, The Tantrum That Saved the World, a children's book on climate change, which he co-authored with Megan Herbert. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So, Michael, you've been raising the alarm about climate change for decades. Talk about the significance of this IPCC report. The Paris Climate Accord years ago actually set 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels as an aspirational target. But this report makes it seem like that target is nowhere near enough.
Yeah, and in fact, even this report is overly conservative, as these IPCC reports often are. It turns out that in some ways, this latest report has actually understated the amount of warming that we've already experienced because of the burning of fossil fuels and the increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so arguably, we are actually closer to those 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2.0 Celsius thresholds, temperature thresholds that are discussed in the report. We're probably closer to them than the report implies. We probably have less carbon left to burn if we are to avoid crossing those thresholds.
But 1.5 degrees seems like such a tiny increase. Explain the history and significance of that figure, the 1.5 degree rise in temperature above pre-industrial levels, and how much worse would 2 degrees be than that?
Yeah, so 1.5 degrees Celsius warming over a timescale of a century is unprecedented, as far back as we can go. We have not seen rates of warming that large, and in fact, the level of warmth that we've now reached is unprecedented in tens of thousands of years. So even what might seem like a modest amount of warming can be profound from the impacts that warming can have. Just think about this. The warming that we've already experienced is more than halfway. It's more than halfway from the warming between the last ice age and the modern pre-industrial climate. So we've already warmed the climate half as much as it warmed coming out of the last ice age. And that has implications for the melting of ice. We are inching ever closer to crossing key thresholds where we basically lock in the melting of large parts of the West Antarctic ice sheet and potentially even the Greenland ice sheet. Enough ice to give us not feet, but meters of sea level rise in the centuries ahead. For every half a degree Celsius warming of the ocean surface, we increase the destructive potential of hurricanes by more than 10%, closer to 15%. That's a large enough signal that you can see it in the data. You can see it playing out. And when it comes to extreme weather in general, unprecedented floods and heat waves and wildfires and droughts like we have seen over the past few years, that is the face of climate change. It's no longer subtle. And that's just 1.5 degrees Celsius. Every additional half a degree Celsius locks in more destructive, more extreme weather events, more melting of ice, more sea level rise, and 2 degrees Celsius might be enough to basically destroy the world's coral reefs. We're ever close, we're inching ever closer to that threshold.
You mentioned that you thought that these IPCC scientists might have been too conservative in their estimates. And in coverage of this report, of this IPCC report, several outlets, the New York Times, Business Insider, are saying that we're on track to reach 1.5 degrees by 2040, not 2030. So we're seeing even more conservative estimates from the coverage of the report than is in the report itself. Could you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's sort of a bad game of telephone, where parts of the report have been translated for the purpose of the summary for policymakers, and then there are press releases that have been sent out, and there's been a lot of nuance that has been lost in translation, as it were. I also pointed out that the IPCC made a number of extremely conservative, I would argue overly conservative decisions in how they measure the warming that has already happened. And by doing that, they underestimate how close we are to these 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius thresholds, and they overestimate how much carbon we have left to burn. If you look, for example, at the northern hemisphere, which is where most of us live, and you ask the question, when do we cross the 2 degrees Celsius warming threshold for the northern hemisphere if we continue with business as usual burning of fossil fuels? I showed in an article several years ago in Scientific American, we crossed that threshold before 2040, in the 2030s. So we are on our way to blowing past the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark and crossing the 2 degrees Celsius threshold in a matter of, depending on how you define it, it really doesn't matter. Is it 2 decades? Is it 3 decades? It hardly matters. In order to avoid crossing those thresholds, we need to bring our emissions down dramatically, arguably more dramatically than implied in this latest IPCC report.
Yeah, another report from 2016, The Truth About Climate Change, which was authored by leading climate scientists, some of whom are actually on the IPCC, said that we'll hit 2 degrees by 2050, even if every country fulfills the Paris Climate Agreement. That seems like a pretty significant difference, especially because that was before Trump was elected.
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on there. So first of all, the Paris Agreement alone doesn't stabilize warming below those dangerous levels of warming, below 2 degrees Celsius. There are credible estimates that have been done that if you tally up all of the commitments under the Paris Accord, and keep in mind that many countries, including Europe and the US, are not quite meeting their targets at this point. But assuming every country meets its target, that only gets us halfway from where we would be headed, which would be towards 4 to 5 degrees Celsius warming of the planet, a catastrophic warming of the planet by the end of the century. The Paris Agreement only gets us halfway down to that 2 degrees Celsius mark, and nowhere near that 1.5 degrees Celsius mark. What that means is that Paris sort of gets us on the right path, it gets us on the right road, it helps us start to bend that curve of carbon emissions downward, but we'll need to do a whole lot more work if we are going to stabilize warming below dangerous 2 degrees Celsius, let alone 1.5 degrees Celsius warming limits.
To curb climate change, the report says that we must reduce global emissions by 45% from 2010's levels by 2030, and altogether by 2050. It also says that by 2050, the use of coal as an electricity source would have to drop from nearly 40%, which it is today, to between 1 and 7%. About 67% of our energy must come from renewable sources like wind and solar. And the IPCC report really puts the pressure on governments to act, especially the Trump administration. But Trump hasn't even responded to it at all. Given our current political climate, you could say, is it even likely that we could do any of these things? Is it possible to take these sorts of policy actions?
Well, political will is renewable, and right now, in less than 30 days, in less than a month, we have a critical midterm election here in the United States where the people can make their voices heard. If we are not satisfied with a president who not only won't act on climate change, but denies it exists, and a Republican Congress that has enabled his denialism and his delay in dealing with this problem, we have an opportunity to shift the political winds in a direction that's more favorable to climate action. So that's critical. People can impact the process. People can impact the problem by voting. That is one very important way that we can act to help avert catastrophic climate change. Well, even in the absence of national leadership, we have no national leadership on this issue right now, but we do have leadership at the state level. States like California, led by Jerry Brown, the other West Coast states, the New England states, many of the Mid-Atlantic states have banded together to form consortia to put a price on carbon, to incentivize renewable energy. Many of our largest businesses, many of our largest companies and corporations here in the U.S. are acting to reduce their carbon emissions. And because of that, we may meet our Paris obligations even without support from the president or the Republican Congress. But as I said before, we need to not only meet those obligations, we need to improve on them substantially if we're going to avert catastrophic warming of the planet. And that's going to require leadership at the national level. One way to try to ensure that happens is to show up at the polls and to vote out politicians who refuse to act, who deny the problem, and vote in politicians who are willing to be part of the solution.
I don't want to belabor this, but you mentioned that the Trump administration was denying the existence of climate change. But last month, the Washington Post reported that buried in this some hundreds of pages long National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration statement is this prediction that the world will warm by 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So essentially they said, given that the world is going to warm catastrophically anyway, new policies, in this case of freezing of fuel efficiency standards, it's just a drop in the bucket. So again, given this political climate, when people are saying, if the world is going to warm so drastically anyway, if the outcome is so, requires such fatalism, is it worth acting in any case? How do you respond to people who say, it's too late to act?
Yeah, so here you have two equal and opposite untruths, and it really speaks to the intellectual honesty or lack thereof when it comes to the Trump administration. They're willing to use two completely inconsistent talking points. On the one hand, climate change is a hoax, it doesn't exist. On the other hand, it's going to be so large that there's little we can do about it now. And what that tells you is that there's no good faith in their position on climate. They're just looking for any argument, throwing as much mud on the wall as they can to try to block progress to deal with this problem, because they're basically furthering the agenda of the fossil fuel interests and the conservative donors who fund this administration and congressional Republicans today. The reality is that there is still time to reduce our emissions by the amount necessary to avert the worst impacts of climate change. But not if we continue to vote in climate change deniers and fossil fuel lobbyists like we have in the form of the current administration and the congressional Republicans who are enabling their agenda.
But what about some of the Democratic leaders who are leading the way on climate change? For instance, you mentioned Jerry Brown's administration in California as being really aggressive in terms of climate change, really taking the lead on climate change. But critics would say that, since he became governor, he's admitted some 20,000 new oil and gas permits. So do we also need to act on the supply side versus the demand side versus things like supporting more wind, supporting more solar, and move to really stopping the production of fossil fuels in the first place?
There's a worthy debate.
It's not very effective with the broom. I can't even see the floor.
Versus supply side approaches to the problem, and I fear that when it comes to Jerry Brown, who I consider a hero and a leader on this issue, there is the.
What did you say?
If you don't mind.
I didn't hear you before that.
Oh, can you backing it up?
You need me to. I was in the middle of starting to cook. Okay.
What?
I was gonna start cooking here.
I know, I just need that done quickly so that I can do the floor thing. Until no one gets foot surgery.
What citrus from what? Why would you be cutting wood? What are you cutting with?
You gotta grab some for me, you gotta put it on the floor. you to be on your live stream? I don't care, you're ugly, go away. I wasn't talking to you.
Hmm?
I was quoting you talking to me. Why is the bike in your room?
Because it's in the way.
Oh.
Where else is it gonna go?
Okay.
Where else is it gonna go?
I don't know.
Excuse me, Poppy. You're in the way, Poppy. Still in the way, Poppy.
I don't like this,
What?
what we're watching.
Why not?
Seems like news.
That's what it is.
Don't even pine at me. Daddy took you out before, boy. Mellow, mellow, mellow. The melodious pineapple boy. Whoa.
Hmm?
This is the best candy I've ever had in my life.
What is that?
Try one. I want more of those. Oh my god, I want more of those.
Are you supposed to chew on it?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Oh, I love how you're using the case. So sweet. So I love how you're using the case, babe.
Oh.
Ow, my ass. Get out of here, Dick is fine. Dick is so fine.
You
I
done
asked you to throw
vacuuming?
this in the garbage and you just threw it on the fucking ground.
No.
Yeah.
I did not. I put it on the table.
Take it.
I put it on the table. The puppy threw it on the ground.
Boyfriends are annoying sometimes.
I know. It's difficult.
Why does he have to be such an annoyance, though? I understand.
I once took apart one of these when I was a kid.
You once were an annoyance when you were a kid?
Oh, I once took
Keep
apart.
that.
I once took apart one of these when I was a kid, and I turned it into a dripper. That would drip water every once in a while onto my fan blade and blow wet air at me when I was sleeping.
That's why you have COPD.
It didn't work very well. This is the word.
What the fuck? You're magic. Get away from me. You're too magic for me.
Sorry.
And I'm too goth for that. I am. Look, you guys. I look amazing.
No one is watching. Maybe later they'll watch it. It's out of camera.
I know. It's on purpose.
Alright, I'm gonna start cooking now.
Nope.